Hey everyone, it's Irene here, Irene Lyon. Welcome to this live stream. If you're watching this right now, you're probably checking out the recording, whether it's on Facebook here or on my YouTube page. So as I ensure all systems are a go and all sound is working, I'm just gonna give you a quick kind of overview of who I am, what I do. So of course my name is Irene and I am an expert in nervous system science, in healing trauma at the somatic, body, environmental level. This work is something that I have been really working with and studying intensively since 2004, which is a few years ago. I actually got my start in science and in the human body and learning about the systems back in 1993 when I started my degrees in exercise science, health science, and then I went on to do a biomedical degree in research, focusing on health science and academia. So I've been in this world of the human system, the human body, working with it, what makes it well, what makes it not well, the research that we've seen around the healthy human and the unhealthy human, lots of things. So that's sort of my quick and dirty background, and I really love seeing as time goes on how things that my colleagues and really my mentors were breaking ground with in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we're finally seeing a little bit more of a acceptance, if you will, and a trend to people looking for not just alternative medical treatments, but the real root cause of why we might feel unwell, what it is that we're missing. And the one thing that it just keeps coming back and back and back to these core elements of our autonomic nervous system. So if you're here live right now and you're watching me, can you just give me a little check that lets me know that you're hearing me fine? I know there's sometimes a delay in these videos when they come back up. And right now I know that there's a lot of activity on Facebook and on the social media feeds on YouTube. So it looks like I just got a notification right now on my own channel that I came up live. So that took about 3 minutes, which is crazy. So people might start coming in right now. So again, just let me know if you can hear me, and I'll keep going. So thanks, Manka. Good to see you. Let me know if you can hear me. That'd be great. And what else do I want to say? So I just did a little quick intro to how I got into this work, where I've been the past 20 plus years in my schooling. Thanks for letting me know that you can hear me, Megan. I appreciate it. It's been a really long journey. If you think about it, if I started learning about the system back in 93, really it was 92 when I was in my final year of high school, it was the start of a very long journey, and I'm just super grateful for all of you here interested in learning, interested in this topic, nervous system science, healing trauma, neuroplasticity. It's important to know that this is not just education. I've been noticing many of my folks in my private groups here on the Facebook page, but also in our Healthy Nervous System Revolution Facebook group, that many are not aware that I am a practitioner, that I used to be in private practice and I left that, little origin story there. If you don't know me very well, I left that private practice that was my own doing, my own creation, because I found that it wasn't enough to just do one-on-one work with my clients, my students, I used to call them, once a week, twice a month. The level of education, the level of practice, the level of self-study, and of course the need to work on specific stored traumatic stresses, it was just too large for an hour a week or 2 hours a month. And so if you're brand new to me here, I just want to give myself a plug, to be honest, to let you know that there's more than these live streams here on the social media feeds, on YouTube, here on Facebook. there is an opportunity if you want to work with me through my online programs. I'll mention them a little bit more as we get on, but if you ever want to learn anything else regarding how I work with people in group, online, and in my movement workshops, which is another entity, head to my site, just my name, irenelyon.com. We'll pop that link below. So when we're done here, head over, check out what I've got going on. There's a lot of free resources, but also 2 online programs. One is running currently right now. So if you are listening here, if you're one of my Smart Body, Smart Mind members, let me know. It would be great to know if you're watching. That program is in right now. We run that only once a year. Usually starts early March and it goes to early June. So that's closed for registration right now. We'll open up again next February 2021. If you want to get started with some of the topics I'm going to be talking about, I've got 5 pages of questions, so I'm going to get to some of those today. And what I'm going to talk about in these questions, the answers, very much all of the answers have a similar theme, and it comes down to becoming an apprentice of your nervous system, working with it, learning how to be with your sensations, your experiences on the internal, how that interacts with the external, how you interact with relationships, how you interact with your own thoughts, how you interact with your own motivations or lack of motivations. So this is more than just 8 steps, 12 steps, 7 steps, do them and repeat for a year and everything will be fine. We're not that simple. I always say when I meet new parents, for example, who are exhausted and can't believe how much work it takes to raise a human, I often say, well, you are creating and raising and maturing the most complex system on the planet. I mean, I'm sure some biologists might disagree and debate that with me, with some other ecosystems that are just as complex as the human biology and ecosystem. But what makes us so unique and so tricky to work with is this higher brain of ours, right? This cortex, this neocortex, this higher brain, really our brain in general is so complex. We really hardly know anything about it when we really look at the bigger picture. And this is why this story of healing the human condition, healing trauma, we're still figuring it out. There's no one magic pill. There's no one modality, not yet at least. I'm trained in 4 different things, really, if I consider exercise science as one of my first, then Feldenkraisian learning, then somatic experiencing, and then the work of Kathy Kane. If you throw in my training in nutrition, we could consider that something else too, and academia, being able to scrutinize science. So it's all a very interesting mishmash, a big, mashup of all these things that I've chosen to study. And what my students will say, and I see, hey, some of our SBSMers here, Sandra, Monka, and Jennifer, thanks for chiming in, is they'll attest to this is not simple work, but it is very rewarding work when we get into it. So I'm going to get into some questions. I'm going to have a little bit of today I'm drinking mushroom coffee. Shout out to my acquaintance Taro. No affiliation with his company, but he's got some good mushroom products. He runs the company Four Sigmatic, so got introduced to him about 3 years ago. Very good stuff. So I'm going to start with this. Is such a fun question. It's from Harrison, and this was sent in via email. And I'm assuming Harrison is, I don't know, guy, girl, not sure. I think that's a dude's name. So, 23 years old, you live in Ontario. Hello to my Eastern Canadians. You'd love to know if I could do a video about my generation, the millennials. So, it's interesting, Harrison and everyone here, I looked up the age of when a millennial was born, and it's in the 80s. It's like mid-80s to mid-90s. So if you're 23, you're like on that cusp. But I also don't like labels. So I'm going to speak to the question that you have very generally. And I'm just going to make my screen a bit bigger there. Awesome. Okay, so you say, what do you think my generation, the millennials, are struggling to, why are they struggling to be mature and independent adults so much? And what's up with this trend of depression, nihilism, extreme materialism, etc.? Why is this occurring for us? So as a grand sort of sweeping statement, I'll say that this is general and there's going to always be exceptions to the rule. I know folks who would be classified in this millennial age bracket, and they're more successful and more out there in the world than me and more responsible, for example. And then I have people who are my age, who are in their mid-40s, who would fall into this trend of being very depressed and very unwell and not motivated. So I think there's always going to be exceptions. I will get to the overarching question. So you asked, what do you think is the historical context of this? Did our parents struggle this much? Is our level of attunement collectively lower or higher than previous generations? And then you even ask, is that even the right question at all? Are there other collective factors that affect my generation's overall attunement? And you say, I ask for myself and my friends and for general understanding. I don't even understand why sometimes I feel depressed and unmotivated to go to school, and it's hard for me to just suck it up in air quotes, like apparently was so easy for my parents to do. I know there's lots to both sides, so what are those factors? So this is actually a really big question. And I think if we look at the history, and I'm not a historian by any means, but as you said, our parents, like the parents that were raising my parents, for example, who were raising me in the 70s and 80s, they came from a generation, at least my parents did, farmers, both farmers, very hardworking. My mom was brought up in the Philippines under Japanese martial law. Their country was occupied. It was terrible. So there was a level of survival that my folks at least lived with. They worked hard. If you know anyone that grew up on a farm, everyone is working. Everyone is pitching in. Everyone is up at 5 a.m., and you're still going to school and cleaning and all these things. And at least that generation of people, so my mom and dad, when they were having babies, they had a very strong will to how they were. There was this, we've got to do lots of work. We have to save lots of money. We've got to work. We're not going to feel any of our pain. We're not going to dwell on what we can't change, for example. And so that generation of and again, please know this is very general, always exceptions to the rule. When they have kiddos, chances are, as it was with me, that kid is going to be taught work ethic, cleaning up, working as young as you can, the ideal of being on the farm. And again, this was for me because I had parents who had that. I have friends who didn't have this kind of go. Everyone's going to be different. But what I saw and what I felt is that there's been this swing where if the way in which a person was raised was so extreme and there wasn't balance, so while I worked hard as a kiddo and I had a lot of responsibility, I was counting coins at my dad's office for the cash out at the end of the day as young as 8 years old, things like that. While I had a lot of responsibility, we also had a lot of fun, right? Skiing, I got to do sports. My parents were good to me. They didn't shame me. They didn't abuse me. And yet there was this really strong work ethic. Some would say that children are not meant to do that level of work and they should just be children and have fun. One could say that I did too much work, which is why I have a strong work ethic now. There's a point to this, so stay with me here. So because of that strong work ethic, it's hard for me, so I'm going to speak personally, to slow down because I really love what I do, as I said at the beginning of this chat. So it's actually effort for me to slow down and to smell the roses. I'm way better than 10 years ago, but it's still not my conditioning. So if we were raised by a family system that allowed us to be a little more free, not as structured, no chores, no responsibilities, all those things, we're not going to get that work ethic put into us in a certain way. But then what occurs is it swings the other way, where then there's maybe more capacity to feel joy and follow the impulse and really explore creative stuff. So again, you're seeing there's so many pieces here. But what I have seen with my husband, because he has a son, and so I'm technically a stepmother. Well, I'm not called that. I am, I suppose. And that son is older. And I was talking to my husband Seth about this. He said there's the generation that he was when he had his kids, and he saw this growing up, where because, for instance, he was disciplined too much, he swung the other way of not wanting to do anything that was structured. No routines, no boundaries, no discipline, no chores, nothing. So absolutely no teaching of that little person how to take care of things, how to do things even if they don't feel like it, right? And I'm not talking about abuse. I'm talking about teaching from a very young age. Everyone helps clean up the dinner table. Of course, a baby isn't going to do that, but I hope you guys get the picture. As soon as a toddler is old enough to carry something and help, one would say that that's when they should start learning the real aspects of life. Not in an abusive way, not in a child labor way, but just helping out so that they learn. If we think about just generals of cleaning up rooms, keeping our affairs in good order, in good check. As an adult, if again we weren't taught how to take care of our room, if it wasn't a demand to make sure our room, if you think about it, it's strange, but a child's room, if they have their own room, is their first experiment, their first teaching ground of taking care of life. It's a small element of life, but it's their life, their things, their stuff. And so there's also this trend where, oh, let them do what they want. It's his room, it's her room. It can be as crazy and as messy. I'm not going in there, I'm not cleaning up. So there's that line, and then there's the line of, I'm going to clean it up because I can't handle it anymore. I hope that makes sense. And then what occurs is that if the parent or the housekeeper or the nanny cleans up, that child, that teenager never learns self-reliance. They never learn self-motivation to take care of what belongs to them. So that's one other piece. The other thing, again, that I've spoken to my husband about at length is the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame. I did a video on this a little while ago. Crystal, you're here with me. You can pop that. It was well over 2 years ago. It was actually after a masterclass with Peter Levine, one of my teachers, founder of Somatic Experiencing. It was all on shame. And he really has done a great job in his teachings with his students to delineate the difference between healthy and toxic shame. Again, this is where this loops into all these different side tunnels. If we were not taught via healthy shame, if we were taught with ridicule and abuse and just venom and poisonous terribleness from our parents, it feels terrible. This is why it's called toxic shame. It gets into the cells, it gets into the posture, it gets into our physiology. If that was given to us, and then we have our own kids, one of two things will happen. One thing is that we will vow to not do anything the way our parents did. And we, again, like I said, we swing to this other direction to the point where what we do is actually also harmful because we're not teaching any right from wrong. We're not teaching any discipline. Some folks have the awareness to go, that wasn't right. I have to figure out how to create and discipline, form boundaries and love and connection without the toxic shame, but with the healthy form. that is so hard. If we never experienced it ever, it's going to be like looking at a map and not knowing how to see lines. It just won't make sense to us. And again, I'll use myself and my husband as example. He got the toxic kind that was horrific. I got the healthy kind that was constructive. Because of his toxic upbringing, when he had his little one, he didn't want to put any burden, any stress, any anxiety on that little one. And as we see, and as we've seen in many kids who are in their early 20s now, if this occurred, or it's not just early 20s, it depends on where they got that expression, that way of parenting, they won't know the strict boundaries. It's hard for them to know right from wrong. It's hard for them to be motivated. Sir Harrison, but what again I've seen is the swinging too far because something was not well when we were young, and so we go the other way. So there's like, it feels as though that millennial generation and the one a little younger than that, and again, general, I can't say this enough, they got the parents who had the really toxic boundaries, discipline, kind of that military style upbringing where things were very cold, very structured, almost so many rules that they just went the other way and were like, I'm not doing that. But then we get into problems because a human system, when they're immature, when we're young, we don't know what to do. We don't know that that's a hot stove. We don't know that it's not right to do this or that. We don't know how to clean up our room. We have to be taught. We don't know how to cook food. We need to be taught. We don't know. We're not like, if you've ever had animals, kittens, puppies, any real wild animal that's a mammal, when they come out, they know how to lick themselves and clean themselves. Cats, right? They know how to do it. How do they know how to do that? How does a cat know to lick its paw and put its paw behind its neck to wash its ears? It's in their genetic code, so strong. Humans, we don't have that luxury. I hope you see that distinction. We haven't been given that because of this higher brain. We're not as rote as other mammals in the animal kingdom. And so because of that, we have to be taught. And if our parents don't know how to do that in a healthy, disciplined, boundaried, fun, connected, but still serious way, we will lose our way when we become adults because we've never been given that apprenticeship. And then the other thing I'll say is from the emotional side, again, if I think about the era that I was brought up in, even in that era, it really wasn't kind of cool to express your emotions. It wasn't the thing to talk about feelings. Everything just got, usually, again, huge sweeping generalization, it was either rage and anger in some households, or it was stone cold silence and everything was frozen and frigid. And so if that was how we were brought up, again, this is something else I'm seeing, and this I'm seeing is really creating a lot of havoc in kiddos, is then those parents who had that rigidity, for example, have their kids and they're overexpressive. They share too much with their kids. They don't know how to teach their kiddos how to self-regulate out of the emotion. Again, I'll go into this a little longer because it's a really interesting question. If we think about kindergarten, again, this might be something that will connect this a bit more for some folks. I don't remember this, but when I was 5, which is when you go to kindergarten, I was dropped off and I cried and cried and cried. Even though my dad had let me choose the school I went to. I went into one school, I didn't like it, I went to another school, he saw my energy, he's like, okay, this is the one we're gonna go to. Even though it was further for them to get me to, they had that insight to know she likes this one. And yet on that first day, I show up, crying, don't go, don't leave me. What do you think happened when he came back at the end of it's not the end of the day, at the end of the morning or afternoon to pick me up? I didn't want to go back home. I had so much fun because I met all these new little people. It was fun. We got to play. We got to sing. We got to do some of the things that I probably never did with my parents because they were always working. Again, not their fault, but it was a kid zone, and I was an only child. So what I see often now is when parents have not healed their own pieces from childhood, when they see that little one crying and screaming, "Mommy, mommy, don't let me go, I don't want to go," they'll actually not let them go, and they'll protect them and not let them feel that discomfort. And this is where we get into a little bit of a tricky problem, because then that child isn't learning the resiliency to go out on their own. Now, there's a subtunnel to this too, a subset. Often, and again, if that parent hasn't worked on their own level of fear and anxiety, they're not going to want to see their child in distress. It's going to trigger them too much. But it's not because of the child, it's because of the past stuff that they haven't figured out and healed. So one could say, perhaps my dad, for example, had healed all his stuff, which my sense isn't the case, but there was a part of him, due to his more hardcore farming work ethic, she'll be fine. He saw that I was okay the other day going there, so he made the judgment, and I had to go to school because my parents had to work. There wasn't any, he just couldn't keep me. So anyways, for those of you coming on now, I'm answering a really interesting question from Harrison about kids that are younger these days. We've said millennials, but it's more than millennials, because it can also be people who are my age group in the mid-40s, people who are not able to push ahead, who suffer a bit of depression, who find it unmotivated to get going. There's so many factors, you guys. I wish I could give you one reason, but it's also cultural. Again, certain generations have had this, the instant access to the internet. Again, the internet is not bad, and this social aspect of how we get onto the internet, but what gets problematic is when there aren't boundaries with it. Right? Again, if that's all that little person is consuming, there's an instant gratification. There's no waiting for watching The Love Boat next week, right? And you have to wait till Friday night to watch Treasure Island and The Love Boat. That's what I watched when I was a kid. You could just watch it all in one weekend, right? So again, this instant gratification of just pressing on the next thing, it isn't allowing kids and adults to feel a little bit of I just have to hang out with myself now and do something else. So we've also got this dopamine response occurring. It's addictive, the way that we've set up our technology. And so again, if a parent isn't very careful about how that is offered up, because we can't restrict it. It's like the kids that I grew up with who only ate healthy and their mothers were freaky crazy with organic. I'll never forget it, seeing some kids that just, they weren't allowed any sugar, they weren't allowed juice, everything had to be so clean and healthy, which we would say is good. And if that child knows there's something called a Snickers bar or ice cream or a Pop-Tart, and they're never allowed to try it or have it, it isn't even about it being a treat. If they're restricted from that, you talk to those kids, they have trouble with their food, even though they grew up eating really well, because they were restricted to the point where it was almost a sin to eat anything that wasn't healthy. And then what do kids do when they know something's bad? They go and they do it, right? We could go down this route with sex with kids, all these things, drinking, smoking, etc. Okay, I'm going to stop on that question because it's a long one, but it really, it shows, Harrison, so many factors. Did the parents do their own healing? Chances are they haven't. I'm hoping as we move forward into the world that this trend of working on our stuff becomes more common in the younger populations who have yet to have kids. I'm hoping that the idea of discipline and boundaries and teaching chores and how to cook and clean and take care of your belongings becomes the normal. I'm hoping that the concept of healthy shame gets understood a bit more, because when we don't have boundaries and certainties, this is what also causes anxiety in kids. And to go back to your question about depression, if a child can't handle their anxiety and they're too confused, what's the next line of defense? Shutdown. And shutdown is what breeds depression. That's what breeds chronic illness, various mental disorders, lethargy, no motivation, procrastination, self-sabotage, etc. Not knowing what we want. It's that lack of healthy life force energy. So I've riffed on this topic for a little bit, but it was an important one. So thank you for that, and I hope that's, again, given a little bit of insight. This is by no means a complete description of all of this. I've kind of picked and choosed all these different pieces, but just know that it's warranted, your question. And also, like, let's say, as you are, Harrison, you're someone who is living through perhaps that early upbringing that wasn't boundaried, disciplined, but connected, caring, etc. At this age, 23, you're still so young, so young. Your system is new, really, and so the options, the potential to shift and rewire is so huge, and it means almost looking at how can you, in some ways, reparent yourself, offer up to yourself tasks, responsibilities. Again, you know yourself better than me, but how can you find ways to put, maybe if there was no structure growing up, adding some structure, or if it was so structured, how can you let go of some of the structure? You know, just again, it's all about finding that balance and that flow in the system. Okay, next question here is, again, I got this through email, you guys. So remember, if you're not on my email list, please get on it, because I always get to the email questions first. Next question's from Todd. So your question is, I have a question for you around how this nervous system work. How is it effective if you struggle with feelings or recognizing sensations in the body? So it's 100% effective, because we actually can't do this nervous system work that I do if we can't feel what's going on inside, I should say. And so for some of us, when we get into this work, we might do some of the basic lessons that I teach in my programs, and some people will be like, I don't feel a damn thing. Like, am I doing this wrong? And the answer is no. It just means along the spectrum of survival physiology, that system is in more shutdown. It's more numbed out. It's more disconnected from the body. I did a series of 3 videos back in the fall on this. What to do if you feel bored when you're doing this work. What to do if you're feeling excessive terror and fear when you're doing this work. And what to do when you're feeling crazy sensations. So we can pop those up there if you want a little bit more information on those. But you say my childhood was very traumatic, looks like, alcohol. I think what you meant, you have an abbreviation. I looked it up. It looks like you mean there was alcoholism in the house, meaning your parents were not really there. They were suffering in their own ways with their own traumas. Because remember, all addiction is essentially, from what we have seen, unresolved trauma. It's the system desperately looking for self-soothing. It's the system that was never taught how to self-soothe. I mean, this goes back to that first question about children, adults who don't know how to take care of themselves, that don't know how to be with uncomfortable sensations. If we were never given an opportunity to learn how to be with discomfort, when we're adults, the moment we feel discomfort, what are we going to do? We're going to try to get rid of it. We're going to try to ignore it. We're going to try to numb it out. And that can be through substances. It can be through excess work. It could be through shopping. It can be through sex. It could be through adrenalized sports. It can be getting lost in sport. watching television. I mean, it's endless. And again, nothing wrong with television, nothing wrong with wine or having a cocktail, nothing wrong with eating food that we really love. But it's when those things become a need to bring our system down, then it becomes an issue, as opposed to for pleasure, enjoyment, and for nutrition. Okay, so your overarching question is there a prerequisite or type of body work that would be important to engage in before your nervous system work, or is that part of the work itself? So yes, it's part of the work itself. My training, it's not just in one therapeutic modality, it's in 3 things. So we're doing body work in my programs, we're doing movement exercises, very subtle. It's not like lifting weights at the gym. It's very finessed and very tuned to working with the neuroplasticity of your body and sparking up connections that maybe aren't there. So that is part of the work. And you say you currently do not have a rapport with your body. Again, that's fine. And we have to remember, when we were brought up in a childhood situation where it was dangerous and scary, it makes sense to disconnect from your body, because why would you want to feel all the uncertainty and all of the emotions and sensations when no one is there to help you come down, right? When we are children and mom and dad aren't hugging us when we're scared, or kissing our boo-boos when we fall and scrape our knee, if they're not there to hug us if we had a really hard day at school and someone was picking on us, whatever, or whatever it might be, if they just brush that off as it's no big deal, you're fine, get over it, go to your room, blah, 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 whatever it might be, we will not build up the nervous system muscle, so to speak, the capacity to feel difficult stuff and bring it down naturally. This is what childhood is supposed to be. It's supposed to be teaching a human how to self-regulate. So a lot of people say, oh, the brain is developed by this age and self-regulation is on board at that age. And that isn't necessarily true, because it depends on what the environment was like. How was the nurture? There are some kids who are 8 years old and can take care of an entire household and know how to regulate their newborn, sibling, cook food, clean, and take care of everything. Not that 8-year-old should do that, but if they've learned, they know how to do it. Whereas there's some people who are in their 60s who still don't know how to self-regulate, which is sadly the bulk of our human population, right? And it's just because, again, and mostly, again, very much in the Western world, we weren't taught, because the trauma train, so to speak, this intergenerational, the transgenerational traumatic events have not been stopped. But we're starting to stop them now, which is super duper cool. Way more young people are starting to wake up to this and realize that they have to do something about this, because they don't want to have kids and pass their stuff on to their children, because now the science, the research, it's out there, and we know it'll get passed on if it is not healed in the current day. Okay, question from, I'm going to get to this one. Let's see, is this a question from Andre? It's on the comment. So I've worked with a somatic experiencing practitioner for almost 2 years and believe wholeheartedly in this approach. So do I. However, my issue, sorry guys, tried to make that bigger and it disappeared. My issue is that due to a lot of developmental and childhood trauma, including numerous medical interventions and surgeries, I have little to no access to my body. Makes sense. So I do craniosacral therapy and other touch-based approaches to connect more with my body, but I feel like it's not enough. How do I start gaining access to sensations in my body, especially now when working with a body worker or a trauma therapist is logistically impossible? Andre, if you can start my 21-day nervous system tune-up, that's my self-study course. I really recommend that, because here's the thing. Somatic experiencing is not the full picture. It's a huge part of the picture, But when there was a lot of, as you said, early developmental medical, we're working at the level of general regulation. And so, as you said, there's a lot of, I'm just reading your question again a little bit here. To connect with the body requires slowness, it requires titration, which is a common concept we use in SE, and it requires constant practice. If you weren't on at the very start of this chat, I talked about why I stopped being in private practice, practicing somatic experiencing, Feldenkrais, and somatic practice, which is another thing I'm trained in. It's the work of Kathy Kane, who is also a somatic experiencing practitioner, but she does her own work 100% focused on early trauma, developmental trauma, and using touch work. So when we don't have access to the body, I'll be really honest, it'll be really hard to do SE sessions. So my wonder, how were these sessions working if you can't access your body? Maybe you were doing touch work with the practitioner, but there's something in our field of work called the Faux window. So there's this concept called the window of tolerance, and then there's the false or the faux window of tolerance. When we had good regulation growing up and we had no trauma, our window of tolerance is this window where we can get activated and activated in fight flight, or maybe go into shutdown, but we're still able to tolerate it, and we don't disconnect, we don't disconnect, or we don't get more activated. We can stay in this window, right? This easy window. But when we had early traumatic events, when we didn't have, let's say, that parental structure that taught us how to self-regulate, we might not have any window of tolerance. It's not even a line, it's just poof, it's not there. And so what we have is something called a faux window, which means we're still in the world, which, you know, if you've got a computer and you can speak clearly, which you can from your comment, you're able to contribute to society, be in society, so you're able to function, but for many, it's a false functioning. So we're working in this realm of false regulation. It's dysregulation, essentially. And so if we can't feel our body, chances are the system, when you see, and again, I'm making a huge generalization, so this might not be accurate, but this is what I'm kind of channeling, if you will. So if we go to this practitioner and we're not aware of these subtle, tiny overrides that the system is doing, that we're not aware that we're actually activated before we even sit down in their office, we can then go into that session and do some work, but we're actually out completely not there because our system is so afraid from the beginning. And this is where it gets tricky. This is where I have another question here about craniosacral, and you mentioned craniosacral. Some really good forms of body work that are amazing cannot be amazing when a person is not able to track their system going into overwhelm, because it's so natural and so normal that that's just how we live. We don't even realize that we're already in overwhelm, or we're already disconnected and dissociated from our body. So I found, again, this is just my observation, my experimentation, and thus far we've had people from close to 70 countries go through the work that we've put together online. There's something powerful about studying this yourself and being guided through audio, which is how I teach, in the comfort of your own home, where at any point in time you can pause the recording and you can process the tiniest little blip of activation that comes up. Again, I'm not against one-on-one work. I still get it myself. I'll still work with the occasional person, usually within my team. But if we go to a session and we feel this activation, but we've paid for an hour of the therapist's time, usually our sense of money and time and not wanting to disappoint and get our money's worth it overrides our system's need to actually only do 5 minutes of work that day. And again, this is something that my teachers, especially Kathy, has talked about, that the model in which we work with clients, where it's an hour session or a 90-minute session or a 30-minute session, it doesn't suit the nervous system. I hope that makes sense. And so again, this is why I found that working in the online medium, for those who can be self-motivated to do the lessons, to show up and to really listen and follow their impulses, of course with my guidance, a lot can wake up. A lot of the body responses can wake up through the very basic practices of orienting, some of the things I teach with posture, movement, containment, exercises. So one video that I'm thinking about is, what was it? From a while back, Crystal, so my assistant's popping things in. Andre, if you listen to a video that I did a little while ago, why online healing actually works, check that out. And the other one to maybe check out is how to find a good somatic practitioner. So again, I'm not saying that your practitioner is not good, not the case, but my curiosity is your system being given too much for what it can handle based on your physiology? So it's really important to know that. And again, I say that because I've seen folks who have been doing a lot of good work and yet they're not getting anywhere. And so the question is the processing that they're doing, is the trauma releases that they're doing, is it surfing over a very large chunk of dysregulation that's just kind of packed away? And so the system's just overriding, maybe getting some tears out, maybe getting some cathartic responses out, maybe there's some completion of procedural memories. But if that's done on shaky territory, the likelihood of that stuff really integrating and sticking is less. Okay, so thank you for that question. Let's make sure that I wrapped that one up. So the general answer, how do I start gaining access to the sensations in my body? You got to work with the body, but you got to work with the body in small little bite-sized pieces. And here's the thing, you guys, those bite-sized pieces will rock your world when you realize how damn small they are. So small that you might not even think that you're doing anything. And if we think about a baby, when a baby is new, all babies are new, when they are not fully developed in their regulation, their self-regulation, if you've got access to a child or if you had your own children, it doesn't take much for that little system to have a startle, right? They're so sensitive. And if we were not given the nurture and the connection and the attunement along with, that sensitivity, we're going to have a very biased ability to sense ourselves because it just wasn't attuned to, and we weren't nurtured in the way or touched in the way that we needed to be. So again, humans are really strange, right? Again, I used an example of cats a moment ago. When you see a mother with her kittens here, or if I was to go to, South Africa or to Iceland, all the mom cats lick their kittens the same way. They pick them up the same way. They treat them the same way. There aren't other cats that are being abusive to their kittens unless the kitten is disabled and she knows that that little one's not going to survive. Then she stops taking care of it because that's just how the animal kingdom works. But if the kittens are healthy, there's no differing way in which she touches and cares for those cats. But humans, we're so different because of this higher brain. Culture, conditioning, society, domestication of our species, all of it, right? Industrialization. So there's just this, we're in this really interesting place right now where we now know what is actually right, but many people aren't willing to put a stamp in the ground and say, or a stake in the ground, I should say, and say, this is how we need to be treating and nurturing all our human babies. No one, if that ever happens, I think that'll be really cool, but we'll see. Okay, Question from Alex. Did I see? Okay. Oh, you're in Austria. I recognize that. One of my best friends lives in Austria. So I know that that email ending. So, question that you have: does it make sense to stay in contact with toxic parents? I always thought only my father is toxic, but now I realize that the overprotective behavior of my mom is also harming. When you start getting empowered and strong, she starts shaming you. So it seems she only loves me if I am weak. Is that possible? 100% that's possible. This beautifully funnels into what I just said about humans being so weird when it comes to raising their young, right? Because if we have got our own psychoses and unhealed traumas and weird views of the world and conditionings, and if we are still emotionally immature, because we don't need to be emotionally mature to procreate as humans, right? It can happen no matter what. And so if we're emotionally immature, if we're still trapped in the hurt and harm that occurred to us when we were young, we're going to pass that on to our children. It just happens. So it's 100% possible. Your mom says that you often make things up in your mind. I have a hard time trusting my sensations. Well, this makes sense, because with this kind of dynamic with two toxic parents, I'm going to make a huge, grand, sweeping generalization, Alex, but chances are your life, your world, your environment was not safe. It wasn't safe to be who you really were. It wasn't safe to be expressive. It just wasn't. And so because of that, we don't trust. We begin to not trust anything in our bodies, anything that our mind gives us that might be creative or different. So in terms of staying in contact, my husband did a great article on this. I should know the name of it, but it's something like why sometimes we have to break up with our families. Crystal, if you can pop that up for Alex, that would be great. And he wrote that because he is someone that was brought up in a very toxic environment, and he had to disconnect from one side of his family because it was just venom. It was poison, right? And he tried, and it just like, no more, can't do it. Makes him sick when he thinks about them. It's impossible for him to connect with that part of his family. And so again, each person is different. It depends on our dependency on them. Can we not be in contact with them? Again, they're their own people. They're adults. If you are able to live not with them, and again, you're going to have to figure this out on your own, really do some soul searching, really feel, because here's the thing. We can do a lot of good work on ourselves, but if our boundary and our structures and our ability to not differentiate isn't quite established yet, it's very easy for them to pull us back in. And like you said, the moment you start to get power and more empowered and more healthy, your mother shames you and brings you down, right? And that is good for her, because that makes her more of the adult, right? The one that can keep taking care of you, the one that can keep this weird relationship where she might need someone lesser than so that she doesn't feel as low. Again, I'm making up just sort of hypotheticals here. So, yeah, and I think we kind of think as humans that it's like we can't do that we can't disconnect from systems, family systems, parents, but who said so, right? There are many animals who leave the den and they never come back, and they go off on their own, the lone wolf kind of thing. And then there are some animals that stay together as packs. But again, humans are so different because we're so dependent on our primary system for those first years of life. And some remain dependent because this goes back so beautifully to the first question with Harrison. If we weren't taught self-reliance and how to take care of ourselves and find work and make money and feed ourselves and cook and clean, it's really attractive to stay in that family system. But if it's toxic, I can tell you this, our nervous system will not heal when we are in a toxic situation, in a toxic relationship. It just won't happen. And we can do some good work, we can do a little bit of work, but the moment we go back into that poison, even the strongest person, it will kick them out of the regulation. Doesn't mean that all the work goes, down the drain, but it becomes harder and harder to maintain the good regulation and the health that you build up, because this toxicity just keeps coming into your life. So I hope that offers a little bit of insight there, Alex. I'm really sorry to hear that that's the situation, and you'd be surprised how common this is. Not this exact situation, but there's something called Differentiation. There's a wonderful book that is not a trauma book necessarily, but it's a book on relationship. It's called Passionate Marriage. I can't remember the name of the author. Such a good book. And it talks about, and you don't need to read it if you're in a relationship. I actually read it when I was not in a relationship, but it talks about differentiation as humans. And so this is true for relationship, friendships, and parent-kid relationships. A healthy parent-kid relationship is such that the goal of that parent is to have that child go out and be their own person. Do whatever you want to do. Explore, find your own life, find your own tribe. When there's conditions and nitpicking and this constant trying to mold and shift, even though that child is an adult, that shows that that system, the parents, are not mature in their emotional, in their physical, in their mental capacities. They're not differentiated. And so when they see someone doing better than them, it's scary. It's like, I don't want that, because I'm not going to know how to relate to them when they're at that other level, because I haven't gotten to a higher level. That makes sense? So there's this interesting situation where we have to decide, how far do we want to go as humans, and do we want to go past that immaturity and past that trauma to create something that's better? So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight there. All right, next question. Email. Okay. This is from Tony, and you say, I live with my 8-year-old daughter, and our neighbor, also a single mother, and her 2 children, 9 and 11, moved in during the lockdown month here in New Zealand. It's a change for all of us. I'll bet it is a change for all of you. So your question, how do I continue to regulate my nervous system when there are constant triggers around me? Her oldest child hums and sings constantly. It seems he can't stop and gets louder when stressed or asked to do something. So as annoying as that is, that child is actually really intelligent, because he is finding a way to regulate his system. Humming and singing, it sparks up the ventral vagal aspect of our vagus nerve. It's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. If you've ever heard of the polyvagal theory, this is part of those branches. So when we talk, when we when we sing, when we speak to someone, even when we use our face and chant, all these things, it helps to calm the heart down. It has a direct connection to the pacemaker of the heart. So this little guy is really smart. So maybe if you can see that as a positive for him. Now the next thing is, and I don't know the situation obviously, but is his mom anxious? Is his mom not knowing how to work through her own emotions and her own dysregulations, her own fears? And so is that little one not getting the attunement that he needs so that that emotion in his body can get out? So again, it depends on, is it the mother that he's feeling? Is it the different relationship? Did they even want to come and move in with you? that's the other interesting thing to ask. You know, did the children want it, or was it mainly so that the mother had some community? So you said, I'm not sure if I need to work on myself and retreat with headphones and you can still hear him, or do I need to be with him and try to calm him first? So no, you can't try to calm him. You can try to engage with him, but him humming and singing is him trying to calm himself. So there's probably quite a bit of activation in his system and he doesn't know what to do with it. So that's where anger, working with aggression. I did a video just last week. Make sure you watch that, on different ways to express anger and aggression. It's very much geared towards parents during this time. If you haven't seen that video, again, you probably have. Watch that or rewatch it. But some of those exercises I showed with the hands, with the towel, with the pillow, try those alone so that you're not showing him that, right, to get some of this frustration out of your system, because it sounds like your capacity is full. So right now the key is how can you get energy out so that you're not holding on to all of this. And you say we've all spoken about it, but it seems it's too big of a deal for her to deal with. So yeah, it really does sound like other mom doesn't have the regulation on board, is my hunch. So how can you find some solo time? How can you have boundaries? The other thing to be aware of is that right now, COVID-19 put aside, just the fact that we're all connected in a very interesting way right now with this one situation, it's bringing up a lot of old stuff. And the reason why is because I think we're all finally connected in a way that needed to happen so that the old stuff could start to come up. So there's a good possibility that there's more than just the current situation that's stressful, that's triggering and causing this little guy to be anxious. But is his mom, are you guys feeling old stuff that is just really intense? Now, of course, this isn't the best time to maybe teach someone these things unless, of course, they're interested in them, right? So again, it all comes down to her willingness to learn a bit about this. Maybe both of you watch that video together and just see what happens. But I think empathy for him, he's doing the right thing. And how can you find time on your own to express, release, and get things out without harming them or having the children become more afraid because of the energy coming out of your system. I talk about that all in that video, so be sure to watch that. Okay. Katrine asks, I once nearly got into a car accident where the car completely got out of control. So it looks like nothing happened, but here's the thing, something did happen. So you nearly got into a car accident when the car completely went out of control. Know that that is still a traumatic event. Just because the car didn't hit something or injure someone, the system is still going to go into a massive stress response to prepare for the worst. So you say nothing happened, but my hunch is something did happen, but what happened was internal. So you say a few days later, my digestion went wild and never got back to normal. Could this be connected to the car accident? 100% yes. 100% yes, Katrine. Because again, our autonomic nervous system is responsible for two things. One is survival physiology, fight, flight, freeze. The other is all of these internal systems. Hormones, immune system, circulation, swallowing, digestion, our reproductive capacities. So all this stuff is responsible, or the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, is responsible for it. So if we have our fight, flight, freeze responses ramped up into go mode and they don't come down, if that accident, not an accident, but that almost accident didn't get properly processed, the nervous system is going to still be waiting for that hit to happen. So I would suggest, if you haven't, If you can, work with a practitioner to work on that. If you have skills by being in my courses, specifically, again, it could be the 21-day course or SBSM. Again, you can start the 21-day nervous system tune-up now. If you do one of those courses or you work with a practitioner, it's all about going back and tracing the sensations, what occurred, what didn't occur, what is your system waiting to hit, right? There's something called procedural memory, again, that I teach in my programs, but it is this procedure that the body wants to do when it thinks it's going to go into harm. And if that procedure is locked down in your system because it never got to feel that hit or the ending of that potential accident, it could still be in a loop, and it sounds like it is. So yes, 100% your digestion, again, based on what you said. And if your diet hasn't changed, if there's nothing else that's gotten weird and it was just that and it happened right afterwards, yes. If you haven't watched the healing trauma videos, the first video, video number 1, talks about this. I even use an example. It looks like you've seen the healing trauma videos, or at least you've signed up for them, but maybe review that first video, because I do an exact example of 2 people getting into a car accident. One person walks away fine, the other person walks away and their system is just crazy and not well. And so it sounds like that is what occurred to your system. And then, of course, that gets exacerbated if there's underlying trauma that was already in the system that hadn't been worked with, which for most of us is the case. So my suggestion is to start doing the work, whether it's with a practitioner or through my programs, because it won't get better with time. Unfortunately, this doesn't just magically disappear. Okay. Next question, and I'm going to get to one here from Sophie. Okay, so your whole life, your immune system has been lowered and tends towards being more exhausted than others, so I have to take care of myself a lot. I then had a significant bereavement and have had severe adrenal fatigue 5 years ago, and although you've worked hard to get back on track, it's still in the moderate fatigue phase. Before bereavement, I was fully able to solve any energy issues within 24 hours. I did have multiple traumas as a child and young adult and used Reiki and meditation in particular, which were amazing. That's awesome. High, raw, organic, vegan, lots of daily rest and exercise used, but still seems stuck at this moderate exhaustion. Is there anything in your courses that could help with this? I'd love to get my energy back and work hard like I did before. So 100%. Again, Sophie, if you're still listening, what I just said when I was answering my question to Katrine, the autonomic nervous system connects to all of these systems. So immunity, respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, lymphatic, all of it, right? Even our ability to have clear thinking. And so when you say here that you've had adrenal fatigue and that there was multiple traumas as a child, this means that your system has been trapped. Again, I'm making an assumption here, but this is a very common history that is so common. The system has been living in what we call survival stress since you were young. And chances are, high probability, that while the Reiki and meditation were very helpful to keep yourself resourced and grounded and in maybe the energy body, it won't translate necessarily to the nervous system and the somatic body, especially when we don't have that attunement and that intention on the nervous system. And so I would say if you can begin the 21-day course, now is a good time to do it. And as I said a second ago, currently there's a lot of old stuff collectively being brought up in all of us. Remember, we're all connected. And so many of us are going to be feeling more of a pull to figure this stuff out because we know we can't go on in this exhaustive state. So this is essentially the groundwork of what we do, is to teach your system how to come out of those intense survival responses, but also to recognize how they show up in your body. How can you feel them, be with them, but stay grounded and connected in the environment through the practices that are taught in the lessons. So there's theory, but then there's also obviously practical exercises that work at all these different levels of body, attention, visualization, there's movement, there's some sound stuff that we do. So it's a really good way to get started. So if you can, I would start. We've had people that have definitely had severe autoimmune conditions, fibromyalgia, for example, adrenal fatigue, and they have recovered by getting into the nervous system work, mainly because that is why the system is like that. And it's something that is finally being talked about in the science journals. The ACE study, if you haven't heard about that, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that connects early adversity and early trauma with later in life chronic illness, be it mental, physical, emotional, or relational. It's so connected, we can't ignore it anymore. So 100%, that is exactly what this work is all about. Hey there, Harrison. Glad you're here. Okay, just looking through some of the comments here, you guys. Jules asks, I restarted Smart Body, Smart Mind, but I can't get past my resistance to participate. How do I work with that resistance? Feel the resistance and let whatever it is there move. Is there a frustration? What is it, right? Sometimes we just have to push a little bit, and this is where it might seem opposite to what I often say, but sometimes our mind can screw us up so badly because it doesn't want us to get better. This comes back to the question that was a second ago from, I think it was Alex, about her mom, who whenever she got better, she shamed her to try to make her weak again. We can do that to ourselves, right? So it comes down to sometimes we have to have a big person talk with ourselves, an adult conversation, and really ask ourselves, this is life or death. I hate to be so blunt, but it's true. Why are we resisting? Is it because we're afraid of what we might feel? Is it afraid of a new world, a new life that we don't know because we've never been healthy? What is it, right? Or is it old resistance from the times when we were young where we were asked to do something and we didn't want to do it because nobody asked us permission or asked for consent? There's so many kids who were forced to do things that they didn't want to do, to kiss their grandma, to hug that uncle that they didn't like. Right? And again, this comes back to that question from Harrison, that fine balance around teaching children how to be responsible. But there are some things that parents do that are absolute no-nos, where they're going against their children's desires. And really a lot of it comes down to how they interact with family members, being forced to, I can't say it any more than that, like the amount of children I see who are forced to hug and kiss family members and they recoil from them, and yet they're still forced to do it anyway. If you've ever had that happen to you, you know the resistance, the disgust, the I don't want to do it, but then you're forced to do it anyway. That's just one example, but that carries with us into adult life. And so that becomes in what we call overcoupled. We lack differentiation. So in other words, is that resistance accurate for Smart Body, Smart Mind, or is it a resistance from something long ago that has nothing to do with you taking care of yourself? So again, there's a few things to play with there, but as much as you can, decide that I need to do this for my health because it's life or death. Make it almost like that kind of healthy ultimatum with yourself. Sometimes that can be useful. Okay. I wanted to get to one more question here. Where did it go? So this was from, the name is Oz. So you say, when I sit and meditate, my head So when you sit and meditate, my head has a pattern of turning clockwise and sometimes anti-clockwise. So occasionally the movement gets strong and I feel uncomfortable in the head. I think this movement started after I had a craniosacral therapy session. I feel better after the meditation and sometimes tired. What are your thoughts and suggestions? So again, I'm going to make the assumption, Oz, that you haven't done any deep apprenticeship work with me or with a somatic practitioner. And it's important to understand what I call neuroplastic healing sequencing. I'm going to say that one more time. Neuroplastic healing sequencing. I have a video that I did on this. We'll pop that in. But basically what it's saying, and this is just not me making this up, this is what we know through neuroscience and neuroplasticity, is that we have to start relearning and healing our body in a sequenced way. If we do something too advanced and we're not prepared for what might start to happen, A, it might be scary, B, we might not know what that means, and C, there might be sensations in our body that we don't even notice or we don't think are important because we didn't learn the basics. And so, for example, in this specific question, I'll speak to actually something that occurred to me in December. I had a really good, it was a craniosacral session, trained in osteopathic medicine, trained in Rolfing. He was also trained with Peter Levine when Peter did his first ever workshop here in Vancouver, which is crazy. So this man is like in his late 70s. He's a master. I have got the capacity to feel and know what's going on. But when we were in that session, I said to him at one point, holy shit, I feel like you're doing brain surgery on me. Like, he was so subtle, but something was moving. After that, I started to have some very strong symptoms. What someone might think are migraine headaches. I was having vertigo. I was having panic in the night that I normally don't have. Massive pain down my spine and fascia. What was happening, because I ruled out everything else that could possibly be, I wasn't doing incredible exercise, I wasn't, hungover from alcohol, even though I had these splitting headaches, it wasn't dehydration, I was eating well, my relationship was solid, so it was nothing like that. What it was were old traumas, probably hundreds, that I endured as a kid and teenager and in my 20s due to my sport. I figure skated and I skied, downhill skied very aggressively. I can't count the amount of times I've had whiplash and concussion. And I'm pretty certain that when he got into my brain and the bones, something opened that had been stuck. And the old stored stress, survival stress, the pain, the emotion, me shutting down, because that's what I did when I was a kid and a teenager in my 20s, all that freeze energy started coming out in the sign of symptoms. And for me, it wasn't something so specific as your head turning, but this is often a sign that there's something trying to release. Again, I mentioned a second ago, procedural memory. So when we have, in relationship to that person that asked about the car accident, or the car accident that didn't happen, when our system is about to be shocked with something, like a trauma, a fall, something that's big, it prepares to do something. It prepares to look the other way. It prepares to do something. And if we don't complete that, it stays in our nervous system indefinitely. It just doesn't go away, right? And so my question to you would be, do you know what your history is in terms of something that involves orientation? Did you spin a lot? Were you in a car accident where a car was whipping you around? I used to paraglide, believe it or not, in the air, and I had a very near, almost dying accident where I was being whipped in the air with what's called a shear layer, where cold and warm air meets. And unwinding that traumatic event just last year was really interesting, because my system was wanting to do something with my arms to stop, but I couldn't, because if I pulled down on my brakes, my wing would collapse even more and I would have fallen to my death. So my desire to pull on the brakes and stop the ride I was in was so strong, but I couldn't let myself do it. I had to just let it go. Not too long ago, I completed, so I'm saying this to teach what this means, I completed the procedure. I deactivated the traumatic response, which was to pull down frantically on my arms to stop the wing from flying. And I did that with the help of my husband. I got to pull on his arm. And what's so fascinating, Oz, and everyone here, is this tiny little lump of a muscle that I haven't been able to get rid of, that's been in the back of my shoulder blade by my spine. After that completing that procedural memory and remembering that spin of an almost accident, it went away. I've had it for probably 6 years. It was amazing. Even I get amazed with how the body holds this stuff. And I had no idea that that muscle was from that. I had to just follow my impulse. And it came out one morning when I was just remembering some things. And it wasn't because I had a symptom, but just this memory sparked. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I never got to do that movement. And I wanted to do that movement. And at that moment, I felt this activating energy. And then that was my cue to know this isn't just fear. Well, it was the old fear from that time close to 20 years ago coming up. And I knew how to track it. I knew how to ask for support, and I was able to pull, and it shifted. So I say that whole story, Oz, and everyone here, because if we aren't aware of the education, if we don't have the education under our belt to know what these odd sensations, images, movements, behaviors, our grumpiness, our irritations, weird dreams, even changes in our body odor, skin that starts to shift with rash, if we don't understand the complexity of how the system holds this and what it might look like when it comes out, we might just think that's something we have to get rid of, or we need to breathe through it, or we need to meditate through it, or we need to tap it away, or we need to, distract ourselves. And again, if we don't have the skills on board to go into these very fine-tuned responses that our somatic experience brings up, it might be better to breathe through it, or tap it away, or take a deep breath, as I said, or distract ourselves with a resource. But if we have the tools on board to stay with the intensity, that's when we can start to move it up and out. I hope that makes sense. This is not child's play, this work, right? And again, to go back to the original piece I mentioned, the 5 stages of neuroplastic healing, just the importance of sequencing the neuroplastic healing is so important. And the first step for me is education. I talk about this at length in my healing trauma videos. It's a 3-part series. If you're watching this, and if you follow me, and if you've never taken in that series, or you've signed up and you've never watched those videos, do yourself a favor, watch them, commit to them, get through them this week, learn about this information, because until we start to dive into this, we're just kind of lurking on the surface. It's going to be hard to fully get into this work and do the work if we're not actively practicing it. So Oz, thank you for your question. I really appreciate that one, because again, it shows these things that we have happening in our bodies that if we don't understand context, we might not know what to do with them. Chances are it's more than just an unwinding. It might be something else. Okay, I'm going to end it here, you guys. I'm all talked out, I think. Thank you for being here and asking questions. Thanks for the ones that were submitted, and I got to some, not all. And what I can't stress enough, and I've been repeating this like a broken record, but I'll keep saying it, is the work here is right now monumental. And My students will attest to this, my colleagues will attest to this. The people in my life who have done a lot of solid regulation work and who understand how to track their physiology and be with their physiology, they have situations, environments that are safe, people, support systems. They're doing well now because their capacity is a bit bigger. And right now is a perfect time to start growing that capacity, to start taking out the stressors that are keeping us locked in our survival stress. There's no doubt that the world will continue, and we're going to need this capacity. We needed it last year, we needed it 10 years ago, but we need it now and we need it in the future. So Ania says, can't wait for SBSM 2021. I think it's going to be here before we know it. So yes, we'll be doing that next year. And for those of you that want to do Smart Body, Smart Mind with me, and you haven't started with my self-study course, it's really a good time to get in to do that, to start. It's a good way to focus your attention on something that is good, that is healing. And remember, when we do this work on ourselves, we're not just helping ourselves, we're helping the entire planet, because let's not forget, we are a cell of this entire system. So the healthier we are, the more able we are to take care of ourselves, the less strain the system has, and the greater we can all grow. So thank you so much for all being here. Thanks for asking. Thanks for showing up. As I said, start with something now. If you haven't dived into some of my free resources, I really recommend the Healing Trauma video series, 3-part series. We've had this running live for 5 years, if not more. We refreshed it 2 years ago. So the videos are fresh, they're clean, they're animated, they're fun, but they're full with information. And of course, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty work, start with the 21 days. And it's, again, self-study. And there's a private Facebook group where 3 of my colleagues, all very, very professional and experienced, are in. So there's more intimate questions that you can ask specifically around the work in that forum. So it's more than just a do-it-yourself class. There is that group as well. All right, you are all awesome. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves. Stay oriented to your environment and what is good in it. Nurture yourselves, work with your sensations, and just keep showing up and doing this work. Thank you all very much for being here, and we will see you when we see you again, maybe next week. Bye for now.